Off Limits is the money podcast that blows up stereotypes, showing you that managing money doesn't have to be hard.
We want you to thrive, not only with your money, but in every part of your life.
What you will get out of this podcast is real, relatable, and relevant tips and strategies that you can apply today. Hi, I'm Donald Raymond, and this is
Christine Spiak. We are money coaches, business owners, and colleagues who are passionate about helping you become more of who you are. So if you're ready, join us. Welcome back to Off Limits, and we are kicking off season 2 today. Here we are with episode 1, Why Having a Financial Philosophy Pays Off. Donald, what does philosophy even mean?
Yeah, I think before we can talk about a financial philosophy, we probably need to, we know what our finances are, but we need to define this word philosophy, right? So if you search the internet or pull up Webster, you're going to get a couple of kind of academic definitions for the word philosophy, but we searched a little deeper and kind of put together how we want to package this word philosophy as it relates to a financial philosophy. And so that goes something like this. It's an attitude held by a person or a family that acts as a guiding principle for your behaviors and your habits. And so if we think about it in those terms, all of a sudden your financial philosophy is something that you may not even realize you already have. But it is a principle of behavior and habits associated with your finances. So at the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to try to really understand and define and observe what those habits are. And then we want to be very intentional about how we build a financial philosophy for our household finances.
You got it. And you said the word again that seems to come up in every episode, every conversation we have, intentional. So you may already have a philosophy or a principle or a rule that's unwritten or undisclosed, possibly. But really, we just want you to get intentional about this idea of having a financial philosophy.
Yeah. And, you know, it's easy sometimes it's easier to think about maybe some other examples outside of finances, right? So, you know, what's a habit that you have every day that you do, whether it's, you know, brushing your teeth? Why do you brush your teeth? There's a reason that you're brushing your teeth, right? You want your teeth to be clean. Somebody taught you to brush your teeth. I mean, we do so many things that have just kind of become habits. They're habitual. Some of those are good, some of those are bad. And when we start looking at our finances, oftentimes we find that we maybe have some bad habits in there that would serve us well to identify, and then maybe pivot or adjust a little bit and make sure that those habits that we're doing and repeating every day are lining up with our goals and are lining up with our values and taking us where we want to go. And that's kind of where this financial philosophy is. We start building a financial philosophy with a client or even for ourselves. We want to be focused on where we're going, always knowing that the end before we start really plotting the path. You know, think about maybe getting ready for a vacation. You know, what's one of the first things you're going to do? You're going to identify that destination, and then you're going to start figuring out how to get there. You know, this is no different, right, Christine?
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of times, if we don't have that plan, another word we use, or habit, right? Or maybe the habit's a bad habit that we want to change into a healthy habit, then we end up in a different destination. And if we don't think it through a little bit further and say, okay, these are my financial philosophies going back to finances, then if it's gray, right? Like let's talk about, well, I loan money to family, but it doesn't really make me feel comfortable because then that relationship changes. I don't ever really end up getting the money back, or it takes a long time to get the money back. And now this person that I've loaned the money to, I feel a little resentment towards, or a little bitter towards, or I see them spending money on something else when I know they owe me the money. So if you have a financial philosophy that's black and white, I do not loan money to family, well, then when that family member comes around and asks for it, you can very clearly say, kindly, I'm not able to do that right now. Let me see if I can help you find the money a different way. Instead of gray, right? Well, I've done it before. I don't really like it, but I can do it again in the future because I do have the means to, you know, having these black and white rules that can change over time. We're not saying they have to be the commandments that you live by the rest of your life, will really help guide you.
Yeah, no doubt. And you make a really good point. I mean, when we set up these goals, and the word that was kind of bouncing around in my head as you were describing this rule, this principle, this philosophy about lending money to family, and the idea that they need to be black and white, I started thinking of the word boundaries. And there's books written on this, and just this idea of boundaries, right? You need to have clearly established boundaries. And I can say from personal experience that when those boundaries become blurry, when those lines get blurry and you find yourself breaking rules, you're always going to have the same experience. And definition of insanity, right, is to keep doing the same things but expect a different outcome. And so we know from experience what happens when we break one of these rules. We also know from experience what happens when we stick to the rules. And you just have to remind yourself about that. When you have these boundaries, when you have these lines, they're clear, they're very defined. It really becomes freeing to be able to, and I like the example of lending money to family, because there's so many cliches out there. Don't do business with family, right? And there's all these good examples and bad examples. I'm sure that people have had, maybe you've had. Specifically when it comes to that one of the reasons that you don't do it is because you know what the outcome is, right? And so because of that, you need to remind yourself that the outcome when I break the rule is bad, the outcome when I stick to the rule is good. And if I stick to the rule, it doesn't mean that I don't help. It just means I help in a different way. And that way may have greater impact for both people, right? Yourself
Right.
and for the person that you're helping. The idea of, teach somebody to fish, don't give them a fish, right? You give them a fish and they get one meal. But if you teach them to fish, if you teach them to budget, if you teach them to handle their money, you don't just pay the bill because they came up short that week. All that does is teach somebody that every time they come up short, they can come to you for a handout. And you don't want that relationship, and it won't help them in the long run. What you want to do is help that person learn how to manage their money better and develop a financial philosophy that enables them to live the life that they want to and get to live because of these boundaries.
Absolutely. That's literally one of my favorite Chinese proverbs. Give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him how to fish, feed him for a lifetime.
Yep.
Yeah, one of my favorite philosophies for sure. So let's talk about maybe principles you already have in place that you don't really identify as one. Maybe it's just paying your bills on time, right? Like I'm not going to incur any late payments or fees because I'm going to make sure my bills are paid on time. Or maybe I'm only going to use the ATM at my financial institution because I don't want to pay fees for taking money out of an ATM at someone else's bank or a convenience store or wherever I am. So you may already have little simple things in place that help you. So we want to expand on that and think about, all right, let's really create rules that are going to get you to where you want to be in life overall.
Yeah, and so this is a simple one, but having a clearly defined boundary and not using ATMs that are outside of the network, not picking up that easy, convenient item at the convenience store, or at least if you're going to do that, having a budget that has some of that miscellaneous spend built into it, so that when you do that, you can just capture it there, and then you kind of hold yourself accountable so that you don't overspend that category in any given time period, however you're budgeting. And so just a quick example I did had to do with buying and drinking water. And a lot of us buy bottled water. Some of us may live in areas where we can't even drink the tap water. And so if that's you have to have another solution. And some of that might be something like a water filter. I did a quick review that I posted on one of my channels where I compared the cost of bottled water purchased as an individual bottle, purchased by the case, or filtered from a safe source like tap water, local, community water that you might have access to. And for the average across North America is where these numbers came from. But the cost of a individual bottle of water is somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 times more expensive than if it's purchased as a case. And so I've just developed a habit where I always pick up a case of water anytime we go to the grocery store, and I just have bottles of water available at the house that I keep in the cars, and I fill all the cup holders in both of our vehicles, so there's always water available. That way we never have the temptation to run into the store and buy that individual bottle. And then the cost to, just filter tap water is ridiculously inexpensive as you compare it. But having that philosophy when it comes to how we purchase convenience items, you can still make it convenient, and you don't have to pay the cost of buying from a convenience store. So that's a simple example, just a cost comparison that I did because it was something that was coming up in a lot of conversations, and it's a behavior that I used to have that was costing me a lot of money, and it really violated some of my financial philosophy. So it was something I needed to adjust and I needed to fix in my own life.
I think your example is really relevant to a lot of people, being that food costs are one of their highest expenses and
No
one of the
doubt.
easiest things that you can make an impact on. I know for us, when we travel, right, you're away for, let's say, a week and you're constantly buying food and beverages and snacks when you're on the road. What we do is we bring our reusable water bottles, stainless steel. We fill up on ice in the hotel or wherever we're staying, and then buy gallons of water. And that's how we have water the whole time when we're away on vacation, instead of always running into that convenience store or doing other more expensive things.
Yeah.
So that's just one example that can make truly a large impact over time that you don't really think about, but once you start thinking about, really makes a difference.
And one of the things you said you used your reusable water bottles. So this may be an unintentional kind of side effect, but it's a good one, is indirectly, maybe one of your philosophies, one of your principles, your guiding principles is that you want to be sustainable. You want to be environmentally conscious. And so by taking the action to have a reusable bottle, you are reducing your impact, you're reducing your waste, and you're also benefiting from the financial side of that decision, right? You're not purchasing those individual bottles of water. You're taking, a reusable bottle with you, and you're finding, solutions that allow you to satisfy both of those guiding principles. And that one is not a financial decision. In many ways, being environmentally conscious can cost more. And so this is a great example of where you get a double win, right? It's a win-win on the environmental side and on the financial side.
And I think a lot of our financial principles are really like that. So, for example, one of my husband and my financial principles is, with every paycheck, we will make a donation.
Yeah.
That serves us, but it also serves the people that we are helping, because it's something that we really want to be doing with our money every pay period. And we're impacting our community or whomever with
Yeah.
that
So now
donation.
you've got that indirect kind of benefit coming back, right? And so you've made this decision. It feels good. It's helping people. It fits within your budget. It's very intentional. And I want to go back to that word intentional, because, while you can slip into bad habits by accident, you will never turn the corner and get back and start building some of these better habits and replacing the bad habits unintentionally. It won't happen by accident. It has to be on purpose. And it takes time. We talk about it takes, 21 days of repetitive behavior to create a new habit or something like that. And I don't necessarily subscribe to the math or the frequency. I think it just takes discipline. You just have to be committed to the outcome. I think if you can be mentally committed on the first cycle of a new good habit, you can have that habit for the rest of your life. You don't have to give yourself some of these other sort of arbitrary limitations where, oh, well, I was only able to do the habit for 20 days, so I guess I'm not going to be able to keep that habit. Like, don't sabotage yourself that way. If you're committed to it, if it's part of your philosophy, then it's now part of your philosophy. And that's true on day one, and it's true on day two and day 4,000. It's just there. It's true until you change the philosophy.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Let's give our listeners some examples, because maybe they're still listening to us, but they're like, well, how does this really apply to my life? What really are some more financial principles or philosophies or rules, boundaries, all these words that we've been using?
Yeah.
Some things may be, I will only shop local and limit my online purchases. I won't make impulsive purchases. I'll give myself 24 or 48 hours, maybe a week or 2 weeks before I actually pull the trigger. Maybe it's, I will always research and investigate large purchases that I'm making, so I'm making a well-informed decision.
Yeah, no doubt. You need to have very clear lines, right? And that's what you're doing. I like you said you give to a charity, and so tithing, right? As we think about the way we build our budget, as you're building your budget, another way to create some of that clarity and to build on the philosophy is to have categories of spend. And so, you'll hear the three primary ones that Dave Ramsey's made famous, which is give, save, and spend. But even more granular, give to who, give to what, how much, right? So figure out exactly what percentage. I like to use percentages because you can just divide that out of the 100, and it's a lot easier to have the amounts that are going to be left over and not have to always worry about the pennies. So you could just use your percentages there. And maybe, for us, we use 10%. We've used 10% as a tithing line our whole lives. And whether that goes directly to the church or is split between the local church and a local charity or whatever that looks like for you, just have that clarity in your planning. And same with saving, especially saving. How are you saving? Are you taking advantage of a 401k match? Do you participate in different investment type of programs? And then your philosophy is going to help you guide the relationship with your investment professional, what you will and won't invest in. You may have certain beliefs, certain values that really preclude you from being able to invest in certain companies or certain types of investments. And so you want to be very clear with your investment professional, because this represents over time an enormous part of your financial portfolio. It's only going to grow and it's only going to become bigger and bigger over time if you make it a priority. And so it's not one that you want to get wrong. We talk about the house and the car being, combined, the biggest debt, the biggest liability and asset that you'll ever own. But really, if we include our retirement, that probably isn't true anymore, because if we look at that future retirement value, it becomes the largest asset that you have. And so you want to have the same kind of focus and intentionality there. And so make sure you know what your program looks like. And then, of course, spending, you need to know what you will and won't spend on. How many times are you going to go out to eat each week? Where are you going to go? Build a routine around it so that you kind of take some of the guesswork away. Don't get caught in the conversation, where are we going to eat? What do we want to eat? Because as soon as you start saying want, you're not saying need anymore, and you've just deviated from the plan, which means you may be operating outside of the philosophy.
And the word you just used, routine. So maybe it's every payday we go out to dinner that night, and that's twice a month where we know we're going out to a nice dinner. And because it's only twice a month, that is a nice dinner, and it's these favorite restaurants. Maybe it's every Friday, maybe it's every Monday. But when you create these routines for yourself, it's very easy to implement the philosophy that you've outlined for yourself.
So now we've kind of built a philosophy. We've talked about some of the specific applications, and we've given some examples. Before we move on, can you think of what's a good example from a coaching session, Christine, that you've had recently where this idea, even if you didn't identify it specifically as a financial philosophy, how has that kind of weaved its way into the conversation? Can we just kind of maybe we're role playing a little bit here so that people understand, when I ask these questions, or if I'm going to reach out to a coach, what does it feel like to have a conversation about a financial philosophy?
It's a lot of what we've already talked about, but then it's also looking within and looking at your current situation. So let's say presently one of your goals is to pay off your debt because maybe you want to retire in X amount of years and you don't want to retire with any debt. Okay, well, we could work with that. We can create a plan around that. But if you don't put a philosophy in of, I will not take on any more new debt,
Right.
then all you end up doing is spinning your wheels, but you're not really going anywhere. So by stopping the bleeding, right, we're not going to take out any new debt. We're going to create a plan to pay off all the debt we currently have. Then we're going to continue with that plan to now, how do we get to retirement so we can retire by a certain age? And that's just one example.
Thank you for doing that. I know we didn't talk and kind of plan ahead for that, but what you just exposed for me is a truth that sometimes is hidden in a lie. And what I hear people say, or at least react to, when we start talking about this path forward and putting together a plan to hopefully achieve some of these goals, is that a lot of people, I find, believe or hope, I guess, that they won't have to make any changes. Right? So I'm going to go meet with a coach. They're going to show me how I can achieve these goals, or, use services or programs or debt relief that's going to take all my problems away, but I won't have to sacrifice anything. I won't have to change anything. And I think that's the lie, is a lot of people think that somebody else can show them how to live the life they're already living, but somehow make the problems disappear without any adjustments. And I just wanted to, I was curious if you, and your example exposed some of that for me, is we have to set a goal, we have to make changes, we have to commit to a financial philosophy that takes advantage of discipline, right? Takes advantage of knowing very clearly what you will and won't do. And oftentimes that means that the path is now narrower than the lifestyle, which means anything outside of the path you have to let go of, right? There's got to be some sacrifice there.
I think what you explained really highlights the fact why coaching isn't for everybody. Because if you're not ready to make those changes, then you're not really ready to go down the path of hiring a coach to help you get to a
Sure.
better financial future. But to continue that, let's say you are ready and you realize, yes, I do need to make changes. What our interview in season one really highlighted was you don't have to suffer, right?
Right.
Once you create these new habits and you form new patterns and routines, it doesn't mean you have to suffer where life is miserable until you get to a certain place or a certain dollar amount or have a certain debt paid off. It's using your plan, which is a budget, to give you the freedom to choose where you want your money to go. And while you're, in this example, paying off your debt, you don't have to suffer. You can still take a vacation or go out to eat, but it's going to be less frequently. It's not going to be as an expensive of a vacation. And the vacation may be, or the vacations may be further apart, right? We're not taking them as frequently, is what I'm
Right.
trying to say.
Yep. 100%. And again, it goes back to this idea of intentionality. And to get away from that word and replace it now with this idea of a philosophy, once you have the philosophy and you're committed and you understand what that means, and it's this set of, again, going back to our definition, this is an attitude, right? It's an attitude adjustment. It's a decision that you and your family are going to use as guiding principles for your habits and your behaviors. So everything that you do in life is going to be somewhat influenced by the philosophy you have, this attitude you have toward whatever that thing is. And so, focusing on our finances today, we are focused and we are intentional and we have an attitude toward how we view the money that we have and how that money should be used. And we want to make sure that, we understand what that philosophy is with regard to our value set. And I think sometimes too, couples especially can have competing values early in a relationship. They tend to align over time. But especially if you're a newer couple, if you're, engaged but not married yet, I'll say this, that we had the opportunity, my wife and I, when we were dating and engaged, to go through some financial counseling, some financial coaching, because it would have exposed differences that we learned over time that we could have
The hard
adjusted
way.
earlier, right? And man, our lives would just be, not that they're bad by any means. I love our life, but it would be, I believe, we'd be several years down the road farther than we are. And our look ahead is very positive. We're being very intentional and we're trying to live all of these values. Not that we don't make mistakes, but if we knew then what we know now, that's a song, isn't it? Then how different would our life look? So if I'm just speaking to those young couples right now, if you are one of those couples or if you know one of those couples, speak into that person's life, get involved, encourage them to go find a coach. If you're hearing this, go find a coach. There's definitely one in your area. Reach out to us. We do this virtually too. It's a game changer. It will radically change your future if you can take some of that financial stress away. Leading cause of divorce and suicide for I don't know how many years now. So
And number one stress period for all
100%.
Americans
Yeah.
is financial
Number
stress.
one stressor is financial stress. So let's take even just a little bit of that stress away. I mean, it's the biggest percent. It's the biggest part of the ratio right now. So it's a huge, huge problem and a huge opportunity. If we can remove even just a piece of it, we're making a huge impact. And I think starting early is the key.
Yeah. So let's say if you're not starting early or
Mhm.
you're listening to this episode and you're really feeling like overwhelmed, like I've never thought of finances in this way. I've never thought about having rules or philosophies.
Sorry, it's too late. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Oh, you just
Scratch that.
dashed
I
some.
probably need to edit that out.
What we do want you to take away is, let me just start really simple where they can change, right? So for a
Yes.
personal example, our daughter is going to be going off to college in the fall. So we added to our list, we will help her pay for college.
Yep.
We didn't say we will pay entirely for her college. But we do want to, over the next 4 years, help her pay this tuition bill. So we added that to our list. Now, if you're thinking, okay, wait a minute, I don't even really know where to start in those. So some of these things that you guys said today are really helpful. I get it. Okay, I don't want to incur late fees. I don't want to pay ATM fees. I do want to help my kid with college, or I do want to pay off my debt so I can get to retirement. So one of my rules is I'm not going to take on any new debt. Okay, but what do I use for my guideposts? Where is this taking me? I think it's very important to take a step back. So I'm going to get to our book recommendations a little bit earlier today, because you have to kind of figure out being content with where you are, looking ahead to where you want to go, having that desire in life, fulfilling your dreams. And they're not just going to happen if you don't actually take steps to make them happen. So, in preparing for this episode, Donald and I talked about two different books. So, you actually get a bonus book in today's episode. The first one is The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch. This is a very, very powerful book. If you've never read it, it applies to so many different things in life, but it really helps you realize that you're the only thing stopping you from achieving your dreams. And so, what do you have to do today to make that happen? This man was dying of cancer. He was a professor at Carnegie Mellon, and every year he kind of ended his school year with the last lecture that he would send his students off with. Well, this last lecture turned into his insights about seizing opportunities in life. And that's what we want you to do. It always comes back to choosing the life that you want to live and achieving those dreams.
How many people are living a life of circumstance right now? So things are happening and they're just constantly adjusting to all of the different inputs of life. We all live in that world where we're being bombarded by sensory overload, right? Just input after input. But we get to pick and choose what we react to. And having a philosophy, having those behaviors and that attitude toward something like finances really becomes almost armor. It becomes your protection against those inputs because you already know how you're going to respond. You now know how you're going to act. And while I've not read it and I'm looking forward to reading it, this last lecture is definitely, I think, a good example of a commitment toward a life of an attitude and a philosophy that helps direct choices and behaviors. And it certainly, had an impact on the world.
Yes, absolutely. So, another book, if you're kind of looking for a guide to your own life, is Present Over Perfect: Leaving Behind Frantic for a Simpler, More Soulful Way of Living. And I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but the author is Shauna Niequist, perhaps. And the foreword was written by Brene Brown, who many of us know Brene Brown. What I think for me when I read this book, the takeaway was you want to live a life of meaning and connection instead of just pushing for perfection. And if we think about that in terms of our money, maybe it's we're trying to have this perfect life and the perfect home and the perfect cars and the perfect vacations and the landscaping and the pool. And if we have learned anything, or if you've learned anything by, listening to Donald and I in our podcast, is money is only a tool. It's never going to replace you as a driver. It's never going to bring you happiness. You have to have contentment within. So if you're always striving for this perfection, you're never going to be happy. And if you're striving for it by spending money, you're certainly not going to be happy, because now you also have a financial stress and burden on top of that. So this book really helps you kind of to realize, okay, it's okay not to push for perfection. Let me be content with where I am today.
Yeah, and this idea of perfection really, it's an infection in our society right now. There's attitudes. Good to Great is a good example. It's a great book, and the intent behind the book is certainly one that is commendable, right? But if somebody that has a inappropriate relationship with this idea of perfection reads that book, they're going to feel like every single thing they do has to be perfect or it's not worth doing, right? And so there's this unintentional takeaway, this unintentional effect on people that have sort of been infected by this virus of perfection in our society. And that's just, that's me talking. This is how I kind of view this problem we have with perfection. People that say we're striving for perfection, but we'll settle for great, right? We'll settle for almost perfect, that kind of thing. It just creates this stressful environment that really the attitude is you're never going to be good enough. And the truth is you're already good enough. You're already who you're supposed to be. You always have been. And so taking away some of those layers and finding that contentment, which again, we said this before last season, that contentment is not complacency. And I think some people view contentment as a weakness. It's not, and it's actually much more difficult to find contentment, and it's much more difficult to live a life of contentment than to just go with the flow and ride this wave of perfection and always strive for better. That will burn you out. It will give you lots of anxiety and stress. You will never get there. You will achieve some things along the way, but you'll find yourself wondering where the value is, and you'll start to constantly question how you're spending your time. And this is me kind of sharing some personal testimony now, where living that kind of a life and being stuck in that kind of a pattern can really start to erode your ability to focus on what's really important. And it starts to invite doubt into your life. And you won't be able to achieve the things you want to achieve if you doubt your ability to do it. And living a life focused on perfection invites doubt into your mind and really limits your potential. And so, yes, books like Present Over Perfect is a great example of, really calling that out. And while I've not read it, these both are on my reading list. So, Christine, thank you for bringing them to me and to everybody else. It sounds like a book that's really going to help bring some perspective to that whole idea.
I think so. Both of these books had a profound impact on me, and I hope they help others too. So let's kind of take a step backwards. I'll share the quote and then our action step with you all. So the quote today is, "Some rules are nothing but old habits that people are afraid to change." And this was said by Therese Anne Fowler. And I think it just holds true to what we're talking about here today.
And we all have them. Every one of us has a habit that we're either afraid to change, or we didn't know we needed to change, or we know we need to change, but the idea of changing it or replacing it with another habit is a little bit scary, or we're not sure what to replace it with. We know it's not good or it's not the right one, but what is the right one?
And then the action step. So if you are listening and you really want to create your financial philosophy, just go ahead by writing down the money rules that you will live by. And if you are married or live with a partner, do this activity together. Be specific and be positive. You want to state your rules in a positive rather than the negative. And then consider reviewing and updating them annually or when applicable. You want to make sure that they still apply to your life and continue to help guide you as you head into the future.
And we've all heard this before, but I'll throw this in as you're writing these and keeping it positive. Little things that you can do to help kind of keep that mentality and that theme of positivity, instead of writing down a goal or a desire or want or need and saying, well, in order to do that, I'd have to do this, or in order to do that, we have to stop doing this. Just say, I get to do this if I do this, right? And so little things, little adjustments like that, as you're kind of thinking through and writing these things down, will help kind of lift the overall, tone and mood, because it sounds like a fun exercise until you kind of get in the middle of it and realize, oh man, all the adjustments I have to make, that can start to become overwhelming. So just don't let that happen. Let it be a fun exercise. If it starts to weigh you down, stop and come back to it, and know that it's not the only time that you're going to visit this, this process or this action. You need to review it. This is one of those things that maybe you should come back to every year. Read through it, make adjustments, make sure your goals and your values are still applicable to your current lifestyle, because our lives have a way of adjusting and changing throughout the year. So make those adjustments as you go, and you'll get better at this over time, and it will start to become, easier and more fulfilling, and you'll start to identify and see that your boundaries and your path is getting more and more narrow and more clear, and the gray area is going away, and it just gets easier and easier to live within the boundaries because of the value and the benefits that are associated with that kind of an intentional lifestyle. So build a plan, build your financial philosophy.
I love it. I love I get to. That's really hits home for me. It resonates with me. And I'm glad I get to do this podcast with you. I'm really excited for season 2 and all of the episodes we have planned. We're really striving to give our listeners some tactical information that they can apply to their lives.
That's right.
So next up, we are going to be giving strategies for paying off debt successfully.
What's more
Maybe
applicable
you-
than that, right?
Right,
We gotta
right.
start somewhere. Let's get out of debt.
Yes. So that's where we're headed into episode number 2. Until
Awesome.
then, Donald, take care.
You too. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Off Limits.
Beyond the podcast, we are money coaches who want to help you.
So if you are looking for help managing your money, use the links in the description below to contact either of us and learn how coaching can help you thrive.
Lastly, please help us to spread the word by subscribing, leaving a comment, and sharing our podcast with your friends and family.